Residential Transit Pass. Hopefully you're here for the right information, and this will be a great opportunity to learn more about this brand new, relatively new, following some pilot periods you'll be hearing today, opportunity for extremely discounted transit opportunities and benefits you can provide to your residents. Right. There we are. So I'm Carl Hedlund. I'm here with Move Minneapolis. Move Minnesota is a different organization. I mix those up all the time. We're a transportation management organization for downtown Minneapolis specifically. Our mission is to improve air quality and reduce congestion, and we're federally funded in pursuit of those. We do that by focusing on commuters. We facilitate joy-filled, safe commutes that are not dependent on single occupancy vehicles. And we operate as the liaison between our transportation partners, some of which are on the call today, and you, as well as we consult with the organizations that have the opportunity to enable easy, safe, and sustainable commuting, such as property managers, developers, or employers, which is where we usually operate with the MetroPass system, for example. Some of the specific things we do. We offer employer services. We are able to host commuter fairs. We offer transportation benefits consulting. We serve as a resource that shares things like this, a webinar. We have different resources like our telework guide. We have a transportation affordability guide that'll be coming out soon. And we do a little bit more day-to-day things like individualized commute consulting with you to figure out getting door-to-door where you need to go. We offer carpool registration, MetroPass assistance, and many other modes of helping folks get around downtown Minneapolis. You're hearing me say Minneapolis a lot today. That's because we are the Minneapolis TMO. You're going to hear from another one of the TMOs from Molly in St. Paul today, and I see that we have some of the others in our region in attendance today. If you have interest in any of this information, you can reach out to me, and I'll make sure I get you to the right place in that pursuit as well. As I mentioned, we have some really great experts. We really have the best folks to speak about this program here today. We have Michael Krantz from Metro Transit, who works with the transit-oriented development program, and Molly Burns from Move Minnesota. Michael's going to be talking about the pilot and some of the history of this program, and Molly's going to be covering the current status and opportunities where you can engage with it. Residential Transit Pass. I've been talking about it. This is just a really quick 101. Why you're here today, what you're going to learn, and a lot more of this information is going to be covered more in depth in the future. So Residential Transit Pass is a deeply discounted, unlimited use transit pass designed specifically for multifamily developments of 10 units or more. Through this unique program, properties that purchase one pass per unit on a building will be eligible to purchase the transit pass at $14 a month, and that's an 88% discount from the full price of what is usually $120 a month for each pass. This is done with a management company committing to 1 year supply of go-to cards for each unit in their complex, and they can offer this service at their own expense or charge full value of the cards back to the residents. They cannot charge more than what's already being charged, so it really is a benefit for residents that can be offered. So why are we here talking about this today? And it's really just because the equation's changing in some of the landscapes of transportation and how we're getting around our cities. We're seeing shifting perspectives on driving alone, that being for environmental reasons, financial reasons, for social reasons, social dynamics in our cities. We're seeing changes in zoning and reduced parking minimums in multiple cities that can really give you the opportunity to offer this benefit where there have been only opportunities to offer parking in the past, as that's been a requirement. And there's these brand new programs that, as I mentioned, 88% discounts on highly subsidized opportunities to offer transit benefits. That's just a really brief explanation of what you're going to hear more from today. from the experts, one of which is Michael. I'm going to give Michael's introduction and hand it off to him to give you a really more in-depth explanation of the history of this program. So Michael, whenever you're ready, if you would like to start sharing your screen. So Michael Krantz is the program manager for Metro Transit's Office of Transit-Oriented Development. The TOD office is responsible for coordinating development on the Metro Transit-owned property, serving as a TOD resource for the region and providing TOD perspective on the design of new transit capital investments. Prior to joining Metro Transit, Michael was a civil engineering consultant in California and Minnesota, and he has a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology and a master's degree in urban regional planning from the Humphrey School. Michael, whenever you're ready.
Sounds good. Thank you, Carl. Can you hear me and see the screen?
Yes, perfect.
All right, great. So as Carl mentioned, I'm in Metro Transit's Transit-Oriented Development Office. And before I jump into the presentation, I want to take a quick moment to thank Move Minneapolis for pulling this webinar together, but also Move Minnesota for all the support that they provided in getting the word out on this program. This is still a very new program for Metro Transit. It was really just launched at the beginning of the year. And for my part, I'm going to be talking about why we saw the need for this Transit Pass product. And then also some of the results that we saw from a pilot program that we launched to determine how we really wanted to implement this. So one of the pieces of work that our office does is we track permit activity, development activity in the region and where it's occurring as it relates to our high frequency transit system, both our existing system, but also our ongoing transit investments, light rail, bus rapid transit, high frequency local routes, all of those. We've been doing this, we do this on an annual basis. And if you're interested in seeing more of that, you can find the report on our website at metrotransit.org/TOD. But one of the things that we've been seeing over the years is an enormous volume of development activity, specifically multifamily activity, which is what's shown in this map near our high frequency transit routes. So just to put some numbers to that, we've tracked over 6 billion in permit activity. So this chart shows from 2009 to 2020 in multifamily permit activity near high frequency transit. That's over 39,000 apartment units, and just to put it within regional context, that's 41% of all permit value is occurring within walking distance of high frequency transit, and that's just 3% of the region's land area. So we saw a huge opportunity here, which was something that we were interested in exploring further. And when we looked at our pass products, this is kind of just a very high level summary of some of the transit pass programs that we have. We have our go-to card monthly pass, which anyone can purchase on an individual basis. We have our transit assistance program, which is targeted towards low-income residents. We have MetroPass for employers. We have Student Pass for high schools, College Pass for colleges, and then a recent addition was Universal Pass, which is a bulk program for colleges as well. What we didn't have was anything that was really designed for multifamily housing. So we saw that there was an opportunity there that we wanted to explore further. So we started off by doing some peer research. We wanted to see what other agencies had done, if anything, on this front. And to be honest, at the time we were doing that research back in 2018, 2019, there weren't a lot of programs or a lot of agencies that had established multifamily specific programs. There were definitely some out there, but most of them tended to be more employer focused, kind of like Metro Transit's MetroPass program. But we did find a few that were really intriguing to us, and this is just a summary of 3 of those programs, not a comprehensive list by any means, but these 3 agencies had developed bulk residential transit pass programs similar to the structure that Carl described, where if every unit gets a pass, or in some cases every person in a building gets a transit pass, then that property qualifies for a very significant discount from the individual pass price. And we wanted to see if and how that would work here. So that was where we started, and this is kind of what guided the pilot program that we ultimately implemented. And then just to take a step back, the reason those programs were interesting to us is because they saw that they contributed to an increase in transit ridership, a regular transit ridership, increases in revenue stability specifically. And then something that we really care about is this offers an opportunity to create more affordable TOD by lowering the amount of parking that might need to be built into a building just by providing those transit passes to everyone. That's actually something that we've spoken with a few developers about. Often cities aren't the constraint for minimum parkings. Lenders create a floor for how much parking needs to be added to a building, and this might be a way for developers to show that that's not needed. So that's something that we're still interested in exploring further and a potential benefit. So this is a summary of the pilot program that we ultimately decided to implement. The goals of that were just to see what local interest there was for this program. To measure that ridership impact is one of the key goals of any pass program that we wanted to implement, and then to evaluate what sort of pass price we could create based on the ridership we were seeing through the program. So we invited 4 properties to participate. There were 2 along the Metro Blue line, 1 along the Metro Green line, and 1 along our high frequency route 10. Collectively, there are just shy of 700 apartment units in those properties. We ran the pilot for 6 months, which is actually based on a statutory limit, but we also wanted to let it run long enough for travel behavior to stabilize. It can take a while for folks to change their transportation habits. So we wanted to allow that to happen. A key part of the pilot program that isn't part of the permanent program is that we linked use of those cars to a survey. So they had to complete participants had to complete a brief survey before they could access the unlimited ride transit passes. And that was really important for us to get a really good idea of how frequently folks were taking transit before the program versus during the program. Again, every unit received a transit pass, and of those, 366 were activated. But if we break that down by building, I think there was one building where north of 95% of those transit passes were activated. So we got a very good response during the pilot. So one piece that we really cared about was how folks were paying for transit before the pilot program. So this was a question that we asked, but we were also able to verify this with serial number information that was provided through the survey. And there are a few things I'll highlight here. First, this is broken up into 3 broader buckets by color. Blue are folks who completed the survey but didn't take transit before the pilot. The orange columns are per trip transit payment options. So cash, go-to card stored value, MetroPass or Metro app. And then gray are our monthly pass products. And I think, so the obvious element here is that most folks are still paying for transit with cash from these properties. We were also interested in making sure that we weren't pulling folks from our other transit pass programs. So we wanted to take a look at our go-to card monthly pass and MetroPass. And what we saw is that they made up a fairly small percentage of the folks living at these properties at the time of the pilot program. And then what I've highlighted here are the passes where we were able to see exactly how frequently participants were taking transit before the pilot program, and then link that to their transit behavior during the pilot. So we could get a really good, solid before and during picture on that transit ridership. So this is a summary of that ridership impact, and I'll step through these a few pieces here. First, we've broken this down again by color. So the areas, the column on the left first is that transit ridership that we saw before the pilot. This is actual transit ridership. And then the column on the right is ridership over a 2-month period, similar to the pre-pilot period that we saw during the pilot from those residential passes that we distributed. The areas in blue are folks who already had a monthly pass before the pilot was implemented, and not surprisingly, we really didn't see a significant increase in transit ridership from those folks. Maybe a small seasonal variation, but really the economics of taking transit didn't change, and their transit behavior didn't change either. What we did see, however, is that folks who were previously paying per trip for transit increased their transit use significantly. I think we estimate 78% increase in transit use once they received a monthly pass. And then we also saw a meaningful increase in transit ridership from folks who reported that they didn't take transit before the pilot program. So this was a great way to reduce barriers from transit, introduce new transit users, but also encourage folks to take transit instead of perhaps drive a car. So this was ultimately what we wanted to see as we were evaluating whether we wanted to move forward with a permanent program. And we estimate across those buildings that there was, on average, about a 50% increase in transit ridership from the participating properties. This is just another quick breakdown of that. These are daily rides that we were seeing before the pilot, and then during the pilot program. And what we were seeing before the pilot, the darker line is kind of a 5-day rolling average, is that we were getting about 50 trips per day from these properties. You see there's quite a bit of variation. That's the difference between weekday travel and weekend travel. But during the pilot program, after folks had had time to activate their transit passes, we saw that transit use steadily increase to about 75 transit trips per day. Towards the end of the pilot, it was actually getting a little bit closer to 80 trips per day. So we saw a meaningful increase in regular transit use as a result of the pilot program. So another survey that we conducted at the end of the pilot was an exit survey, just to get a sense from the participants who used it, what their experience was. And these are just a few of the highlights that we pulled from that survey. So over 50% reported driving less as a result of having these monthly pass cards. So that's a really important transportation demand management benefit there, and also important from a climate perspective. So that was great to see. It's not just increase in transit use, it was also a decrease in single occupant vehicle use. We also heard from everyone who completed the exit survey that they would choose a property that offers this amenity over one that does not. So that offers the potential for a competitive advantage for those properties that do participate. And that's really important because ultimately, at the end of the day, they want to make sure that this is something that helps their property be successful. So that was something that we were encouraged to see. And then from our perspective, we also saw a significant increase in non-commute trips, so non-work related trips that occur off-peak, which was great to see because traditionally that's when we have the most capacity on our transit system. This is another question that we asked as part of the exit survey. So how did you use your transit pass? And this kind of relates to the non-commute trip piece that I was discussing. But pre-pilot program, we'd have seen more of these trips associated really with work and school and fewer tied to errands and entertainment. But during the pilot program, we saw quite a few more trips being taken for these errands and entertainment, which was a good thing to see. So Carl touched on some of the structure that we identified, but it was really based on the other agencies that had established similar programs, but also the results of the pilot that we decided to move forward with this structure. So we really sell bulk transit passes to multifamily owners and operators. It's tied to the size of the building. So 100 units would translate to 100 passes. And then we set that pass price at $14 per pass per month, which, as Carl mentioned, is an 88% discount from the individual pass price. And we really did want this to be an amenity that property managers can provide. So it goes with the property. As folks move out, property managers would cancel that pass and order replacements for new tenants. So the transit comes with rent effectively. And then just some of the next steps that we're taking a look at. We're really interested in integrating this program into regional TOD grant programs. So specifically the council's LCA TOD grant program, Hennepin County's TOD grant program. This is a really important way to complement some of those projects or grant programs. We'd like to add this program into TDM and zoning ordinances. And actually, Minneapolis was in the process of updating its TDM ordinance shortly after we had implemented the permanent program. So both the residential pass, participation in the residential pass or in MetroPass is a great way to satisfy some of the TDM criteria that were established in that ordinance. I think participating in this program or building no parking are like two of the highest point getting steps that a developer can take to satisfy those requirements. We're really interested in connecting with affordable housing funders because this program has there's so many benefits that this program can provide to affordable housing, but there are also a lot of constraints, and this isn't something that is traditionally doesn't traditionally qualify for affordable housing funding. So we're really interested in figuring out ways that we can make this eligible for affordable housing funding and help address some of the broader affordable housing and affordable transportation issues, since both of those go hand in hand. And then finally, we're going after some transportation demand management funding to support rollout of this program, to help us partner with affordable housing operators, to help us partner with developers that are interested in building little or no parking, and also to work with properties that are in that lease up phase, since this is a really good way to help them accelerate lease up. And I think, yeah, that's the extent of my presentation. I think we're going to hold questions until after Molly's, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael. Correct. Yeah, I sent a quick chat message, but just want to touch on it live here that we do have a dedicated question space at the end of this presentation. I see that we've got some good ones trickling in through the Q&A as well as through the chat function. So please direct those to the Q&A, and we do have a dedicated time to take care of those in the past. We're going to move right on from the history of this pilot and some of the reasoning for this, which, Michael, I know we were chatting before this, you've actually given this information in this presentation and to a national audience. There really is recognition of this program being something that is impactful and has opportunity here and across the country as well. With that all in hand, we're transitioning from speaking about the past of the program to current opportunities with Molly. Molly, if you want to start sharing your screen, I'll share a brief introduction for you. Molly Burns Hansen is a programs coordinator at Move Minnesota, not Move Minneapolis this time. Through initiatives along the Metro C Line and Metro Green Line, Molly works with local residents and other key stakeholders to advance and promote sustainable transportation in the Twin Cities. Molly holds a BA in social science from Metropolitan State University, where they focus on disability justice in their free time. Molly enjoys watching workplace comedies, looking for cool animals in their neighborhood, and hanging out with their husband, Nate, and their two kids, Sean, Patrick, and Sebastian. Whenever you're ready.
Hey everyone, I'm Molly. I'm the programs coordinator for Move Minnesota, and I'm going to continue a lovely discussion about the residential trans pass. So, who or what is Move Minnesota? Move Minnesota leads the movement for an equitable and sustainable transportation system that puts people first. We connect people to transit where the system works well and fight hard to ensure it works for everyone. We advocate for expanded transit statewide and provide transit education in St. Paul. We are the transportation management organization for the city of St. Paul. So that means we help employers, developers, and property managers provide cost-effective, sustainable transportation options to the people and places that make St. Paul the magnificent city that it is. So just a quick outline of what I'm going to talk about. Goals with the residential transit pass, how it benefits developers, property managers, the neighborhood, the whole 9 yards, how the heck it works, and how it's been going. So the residential transit pass is a Metro Transit fare product designed to help property managers and developers meet TDM goals while reducing the cost of parking construction. It's also designed to help attract and retain tenants and improve neighborhood connectivity. So how do residents benefit? For current transit users who switch from using an unlimited ride pass to the residential transit pass, they could provide they could save an average of $1,400 a year. Like Carl said, it's an 88% reduction in cost to each resident, so that's a lot of money. This pass also lets residents postpone or completely avoid the need to purchase a personal vehicle. AAA estimated in 2019 that the average cost of owning a vehicle in Minnesota was $6,400, which is a whole lot of cash. You compile car payments, insurance, gas, repairs, all that. Obviously, a few things have happened since 2019 that affect the world, so that cost is much higher now. What's also great about the residential transit pass is it reduces stress for transit riders. If you've ever been a transit rider, and you got your go-to card, you can add money to it, but there's that window of up to 24 hours where the balance will appear on the card. So sometimes you're waiting for the bus and you're like, there's not money on my card. Oh no, what do I do? And having the residential transit pass, you just don't have to deal with that. It's lovely. So how do developers benefit? With the removal of parking minimums in both St. Paul and Minneapolis, huzzah, developers and property managers are free to explore alternative forms of meeting their transportation demand management goals for new properties. The residential transit pass is actually worth a whopping 6 points in both Minneapolis and St. Paul's TDM scoring system, so that's pretty impressive. It also reduces the need to build costly parking facilities. WGI Engineering does a yearly survey on the costs of building parking facilities, and it's like very intense study, but they found that in 2020, it was about $21,500 per space on average. So that's a whole lot of money per parking space. It was found in the 2019 American Community Survey that more than half of St. Paul households either have only one car or no cars. So St. Paul residents are already cutting back on car usage, moving to alternative forms of transit. So that's another way this meets that need with the residential transit pass. What's also great is it provides a turnkey implementation and steady, predictable expenses. There's supply chain issues right now, if you haven't heard, and that can impact the costs of supplies. So what's great with the residential transit pass is just a steady $14 a month per unit. That's not going to fluctuate with how the construction, gravel, etc. costs. How do property managers benefit? This is a great new amenity to have in your building to attract and retain tenants. When you're picking out where you're going to live and where you're going to rent or what have you in a building, you're usually deciding or factoring in how you get around. You're looking at what streets are nearby, what places are nearby, what's your commute to work. And what's great about this is this just lets you know if you move here, you can ride transit super easily. It's also able to help residents save money, so there's less concern with getting your budget for rent. That transportation cost is just predictable and even. The program also brings in new tenants. Multiple marketing firms right now are finding that Gen Z is just not getting their driver's licenses these days, like drastically low rates of driver's licenses with them. Combo of anxiety and climate change. So with Gen Z making up the majority of new renters right now, the residential transit pass will be a great appeal to young renters. Also, a reduction in space designated to parking lets you repurpose that space for even more amenities, like a community room or bike parking. How do neighbors benefit? So less traffic means less cars, less emissions, better air. We all breathe air. We would love clean air. Who doesn't like clean air? So yeah, residential transit pass, cleaner air. The increase in local transit use also makes transit safer. When more people are on a transit ride, more people are looking out for each other. We're more like self-aware of ourselves. And there is a reduction in unwanted behavior. There's more community support. Again, space can be repurposed for other uses when we're not building parking lots. So we can have community gatherings, more bike parking. You could even put up another small business in your neighborhood. And what's really great about transit is that it increases foot traffic for small businesses. When people have commutes on public transit, they are going down Main Street, they're going through neighborhoods, they're seeing like where they can get their coffee, where they could get like a really cool backpack, they can see like where to go to the movies, etc. But when you're on a highway, you are blocked off from going through neighborhoods. You're not exposed to the small businesses in the way you are on transit. So if you have the residential transit pass and buildings in the neighborhood where people are gonna visit the mom and pop shops, and we love that. Transit amenities also lead to physical accessibility for aging and disabled residents. By introducing a residential transit pass to tenants, they're gonna move transportation or public transportation into their routine. They acclimate to transit. So if someone suddenly no longer has the ability to drive, they are able to stay where they're at because they already have a way to get around without a car. They don't have to move, and that's cool. What's also awesome is that the residential transit pass means that young people can get around on their own without their parents. You know, like even if they're wanting to get their license, you know, before they're of age, they can get around on their own. So parents can take care of younger ones. They can go to work and they don't have to drive their kids to Southdale Mall like my parents had to do all the time. So we can talk about the cost now. The residential transit pass is $14 per unit per month. And that cost is either absorbed by the property manager or passed on to tenants. So that comes out to $168 per unit a year. Billing is done monthly. The contracts are 1 to 5 years when you sign on, but the bill just comes once a month. All the details are handled online. So if you got to update, you know, if a tenant moved or if a tenant moved in, you know, all that jazz just done online. It's super easy, low stress. Savings, we love to save money. So, you know, following the average of the WGI engineering $21,500 per space, 100 space parking structure would be over $2 million to construct. And that's a whole lot of money. If we reduce parking there by just 20%, just 20 spaces, that saves $430,000 immediately on construction. That's a whole lot of money. Also, if you have a new tenant move into a market rate apartment in your building in a 100-unit structure, the income from that tenant alone could actually pay for a year's worth of residential transit pass in the building. And that's wild. That is ridiculous in a good way. So has it been done in the past? As Michael said, there was a pilot, you know, 6-month pilot over, it was 648 units over 4 properties. And there was a survey at the end. 74% of people use transit more often when they had this program. Also, 100% of the people who were surveyed said they'd rather live somewhere with this program. This is not an amenity that was like thrown to the side. You know, sometimes there's like dog grooming salons in buildings, but most people don't have a dog, you know, stuff like that. Everyone liked this program. And 70% of them actually owned a car and still used it. So this program is great for people who are transit curious or wanting to like engage in transit for the first time. And this might mean people will forego their car before moving into your building. So everyone likes it. Let's do it. And there we go. Questions and feedback.
Thank you so much, Molly. And to Michael as well, you're both speaking our language, touching on the opportunities to reduce single occupancy vehicles. And I will laugh at those dog washing stations. The joys of living in a studio apartment. You're also sitting in my garage here as well. But I used to clean my bikes in my partner's apartment's dog washing station, which was so I use that amenity even not being a pet owner. So thank you both so much for covering this topic. We've got a good number of questions I want to get us to. Again, folks who are joining us, please feel free to share in the Q&A function and I can pass them along to our attendees. Otherwise, feel free to raise your hand in chat and I can give you the opportunity to come off mute if time allows as well. So a couple quick questions on the pass specifically to you, Michael. So for the pass, is the usage of the pass integrated into the app so you don't have to have a physical card with you to use the pass as well?
That's a great question. It's not right now. So when the way it's set up is the property owners receive one actual physical transit pass per unit, and then they distribute those out to their tenants. So there is a physical pass that goes with that, and that's what they use to access the transit system.
Thank you. And with regard to the trial, folks are curious if the participants in the trial paid for the passes, or was the survey the only barrier to getting that pass specifically?
Yeah, so in the permanent program, the property owners or property managers will pay for that pass and then decide if and how to pass along those costs to tenants. For the pilot program, we did just distribute one pass per unit, so it would functionally structure. No matter what, whether paying or not, every person in the property will receive one of those transit passes. But for the pilot, we didn't charge. The survey was the way we that was the only barrier to actually using the cost for the pilot program.
Awesome. We've got a number of different questions coming in with regard to the Metro Transit's funding sources. Speaking to, I'm gonna highlight a few of these, touching specifically on what funding does Metro Transit use to subsidize the residential transit pass, and how that program is funded specifically.
Sure. So this, I mean, the way that we structured this is that it's really linked to our existing fare policy. It's not, strictly speaking, a discount from our fare policy. It is quite a bit cheaper than the individual pass, but we accomplished that, like the other transit agencies that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, through the bulk requirement. So when you give a transit pass to everyone in a building, those costs can get spread out, and ultimately we recoup that revenue through that process. So on a fare by fare basis, I guess we wouldn't say that we're subsidizing that, but it is a steeply discounted fare product.
Awesome, thank you. Molly, I've got a question for you with regard to opportunities for how developers can price these units. Someone was curious if the building could charge something between the $14 and $120 value, or at what point can they recoup those costs in offering transit to residents?
My knowledge and understanding, it's just flat $14. They cannot make a profit or higher income from it. They can pass it on to their residents, you know, increase rent by $14 to provide that amenity, but they cannot increase costs.
Awesome.
That's exactly right. If I might just add a couple pieces on that. I mean, in our conversations with property managers, there are a few different ways I've heard them talk about approaching that. One is just to absorb it into existing rents as a marginal expense. Another is to tack it on to, for example, utility fees. So, I mean, if there are other maybe internet or other fees that are going with rent, you can just incorporate it into that. And some have just talked about adjusting rent by that $14 a month, which in most cases is a pretty small amount. So those are a few of the approaches. I don't know if Molly's heard other potential approaches, but that's kind of what I'd heard.
I did recently hear of a building that still provides satellite.
Molly, I think you're, sorry to interrupt, I think your sound might be breaking up a little bit.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're a little now.
Okay. Yeah, I actually did recently hear of a building that still has a required utility cost of cable and satellite TV. And so that building is talking about phasing that out and using those costs to cover the residential transit pass and then save more money. So
That's
yeah.
awesome.
Fantastic.
So if you're a regular on Move Minneapolis webinars, you probably hear us talk about MetroPass, a similar program that's offered for employers. And we've got some questions about why this residential pass has the opportunity to be offered so much lower than MetroPass prices currently.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And this is going to seem a little bit paradoxical, but they're both priced using this functionally the same principles. The main difference between the residential pass and the Metro Pass, though, is that the residential pass is a bulk pass in the truest sense of the word. So everyone at a property receives a transit pass. Whereas with MetroPass, it really goes to those folks who request it, and they tend to be just much higher transit users. There are some properties that have, or I think some employers that give that transit pass to everybody in a building, but for the most part, it's not structured where that's a requirement. So I think that that's really the biggest difference, is that it's going to everyone who lives at a particular property and not just those who are requesting it.
Right. That's fantastic. So we've spoken to this program being new and emerging, and we've used the term multifamily housing a number of times. Molly, I know you're doing a lot of proactive outreach with different types of groups of folks. Can you break down what really qualifies within that multifamily housing definition for eligibility?
Yeah, so Michael, feel free to hop in if I'm skipping anything there. But my understanding is it has to be a building with multiple units, at least 10, to justify the low cost, but also to make it an expansive amenity. From my understanding, it can be condos or rental properties. So if this is, an apartment building or apartment unit you own, you can still participate as long as there is a group dynamic of at least 10 different units. And then there have been some neighborhood associations who have reached out about trying to have property owners, like someone who owns 4 triplexes, getting it under one contract because they're all in the same block. So essentially, it's all about making sure it's on the same contract and the same person in charge, making sure that the $14 a month passes are being handled by the same person.
Awesome. And we do have some questions on how these passes are able to be used by residents and commuters. So it's 1 pass per unit, but then within that unit, is that a pass that can be passed around between individuals? Is that something that has to be dedicated to a single person's name specifically?
I can touch on that. So it just goes with the unit. So, I mean, typically we distribute it. We're not tracking who within that unit is actually using the transit pass, and we haven't established any requirements on that.
And then moving over past that question of who's eligible, we had a question of, do townhomes come in behind that as well?
That is a good question. I think it all depends on if they are under the same contract being managed by the same person and organization. As long as the contract all goes to one person, that should work.
So we've got a couple of questions speaking to that concept of it being the bulk contract for landlords and property managers. Some questions around, why are landlords forced to participate for the full price rather than have the opportunity to go with more individual passes?
What do you mean force? I'm not sure I'm following the question. You're saying forced to get one for every unit in a building?
Yeah, so I'm
I see what you're saying.
I'll read the question verbatim just to make sure I'm getting it. So why force landlords to buy a pass for all units, including those that will not participate?
Yeah, well, ultimately, that's what allows us to do, provided it's such a steep discount. So that's really a fundamental part of the program. I mean, if we were to break it down and just have it more targeted, we'd end up pricing it more similarly to what we have with MetroPass. So that really is an important part. And that's also, I mean, expanding access to it. We talk about everybody receiving one and maybe only a small percentage being those high frequency transit users. But everyone, what we saw through the pilot is that there are a lot of folks using transit, and just having access to a monthly pass makes a big difference in how frequently they use transit, replacing car trips. So that was a really important part of why we did that. That bulk requirement is really how we achieve increases in ridership and make transit more accessible, reducing burdens, but it also allows us to reduce that price. So that's a really fundamental part of the program.
I also add, when it comes to amenities, if you have a pool or a gym in your apartment complex, there's no guarantee everyone's going to use that, but that is still offered to everyone. That is still an investment. That is a large amount of money. But it encourages people to try the gym, to try exercise. So why not do that with transit?
Most definitely. Molly, I know in your outreach for this program, you've had a lot of excitement from residents and tenants themselves. Do you have any advice for residents getting their landlords to sign up for this program?
So I would say the best bet is one, talking with other tenants in your building and showing it's not just you. It's not just like someone who, is into like the Move Minneapolis webinars, but it's like people who have hardy commutes every day to get to and from work, school, etc. Like getting other people involved is always wonderful to show that there's community power in that. It is also great to show how much money is saved. I think it's underemphasized how much money is spent on parking maintenance. In Minnesota, we have harsh winters, and if you've ever like driven through a pothole, it's horrifying, it's uncomfortable, and the maintenance that comes from excessive car use that goes around a building, so much money can be saved. And I think emphasizing the savings and also the desire is the best way to go.
Most definitely. Speaking on that parking, that's often a cost that's really built in with, there's the maintenance aspect, but in the development of parking as well. We've got a question that's around how should we go about bringing this program to the attention of new construction projects and their managers so that we can start to look forward in regard to how we're using land use and the future of our downtown zones as well.
Yeah, I think, like I said, the average cost of a parking space is $21,500, and that was for 2020. WGI Engineering does these intense studies for every year, and it's really wild to read how much the costs go and how they break down. But I'd say the second you find out about a new development coming in, talking to the developers or whoever is in charge, getting involved with your neighborhood association is also great. Often developers will come to neighborhood associations to get approval for a new project. So when neighborhood associations are already aware of the residential transit pass, if a new developer comes to them, they can say, okay, why are you doing parking? There's no parking minimums. You know what you could do? You could do less parking, residential transit pass, meet the goals. So planting the seeds of knowledge about it is a great way to do it. Also, I'd say talking to elected officials is always great because they also have to approve new buildings and new properties. So just planting the seeds is a great way to do this, and talking directly about the drastic, ridiculous amount of money saved.
Most definitely. We've got a couple questions I'm gonna pull together with regard to the future of the program. So we have some questions asking about if that $14 rate is going to be something that will continue into the future past the program, and if there's might be opportunities to expand beyond 1 unit per pass in the future.
Yeah, those are great questions. So right now, I think the internal plan is to we'll take a look at this every couple of years to see if that price still makes sense. So there may be some adjustments on a periodic basis, but those would be outside of contracts. Those would be for new contracts that for folks coming on. And then, sorry, the second part of the question, what was? Can you remind me?
If so it was touching on the $14 value as well as opportunities to expand between the 1 unit pass limit.
Yeah, that's also something that we've discussed internally. And right now, we're sticking with the 1 pass per unit, but that's definitely something we'll revisit as the program matures. That was something that we discussed internally. We decided to just keep it simple at this point, just from a management perspective, and have it at 1 pass per unit. But I know other agencies have established that as a floor, and that's something that we might revisit and be interested in expanding in the future. So something we'll take a look at again.
Awesome. We've got some questions around the contracts. So I believe a number of these were spoken to. I believe, Molly, you touched on the length of the contract. So it's 1 to 5 years. Is that correct?
Yeah. So you can sign on, and I think the smallest commitment you can make is 1 year to start. And then from there, you can talk more about how you want the contract to work. But 1 year commitment minimum.
Awesome. And then in that outreach, so we spoke to the pilot period, and now we're in this place where we're all working together to get people signed up for the program. There's a question about how many folks have signed up since that pilot ended.
We've had, as we mentioned, this is still a very new program for us, but since we launched it, we've had 2 properties sign up, an affordable housing development and then a market rate development opening along Hiawatha.
Awesome. It's exciting that we're seeing a mix of both of those.
Yeah.
Taking a look at the questions, and again, please feel free to keep bringing them in, or if there's an opportunity, if you'd rather ask your question over with your voice, feel free to raise your hand as an attendee as well. So we've talked about opportunities and the structures that folks use to pass along that cost to tenants. Do we have any information on how many properties pass along the cost versus absorb the cost themselves?
That's a great question. I think in both of the properties that we have right now, they're absorbing the cost. Though there was one property that was they were in construction and are very interested in implementing this program. They have no parking on the property. And I think they were going to include it in that utility fee that I had mentioned. So yeah.
Awesome. So there's a question. So we have representatives from the TMOs of the 2 downtown areas. We have folks in the chat curious if this is an opportunity for folks living in the suburban areas that Metro Transit covers as well.
Yeah, this is open to everyone. Everyone
Awesome.
in the region with transit access, yeah.
And like I said, I'm speaking to these demographics because that's kind of where our geography bounds us. But if you're coming to us from anywhere, reach out to either to any of us here. I'll make sure my contact information is shown on screen at the end here, and we'll make sure we get you to the right folks to be talking to. Sure. Molly, you've spoken a number of times to just really being able to sell this program versus the cost of parking. Curious how, if there's been any strategies around getting folks, selling people on the additional cost if they're not likely to eliminate their parking spaces right away in addition to that as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a harder thing. It's definitely harder to get people to sign on after they've already made their parking lot, because then it's like they already put the money in. But something that does work when trying to get them to sign on, even when it's already existed, is talking about tenant retention and tenant attraction. Does bring people more in. Like I said, Gen Z does not want to do cars. And I think that's a really important market to be looking at right now. So when discussing that as cost to bring on, that would bring in more tenants, and like one market rate tenant covering a whole year of the pass, that makes a big difference in the discussions. I think also talking about how it supports the local economy as well and revitalizes neighborhoods in certain ways, keeping people moving on Main Street instead of down highways where they don't see anything.
Definitely. So we're continuing to get a good number of questions in chat. We're going to get through as many as we can here today. Well, if you are asking a question, just know that we will make sure we follow up with information in an email if we don't get a chance to cover them live. But I'm going to try and get us through as many as many of these questions as we can. So with regard to the future of the program, we've got a curious if there's a limit or cap to how many properties can participate if this program continues to expand into the future.
I'm sorry, I didn't. I was reading one chat in the comment. I apologize, I missed that. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited people are engaging. Just curious if there's a limit or cap to how many properties might be able to participate if this program takes off as a success.
Yeah. No, I mean, that would be a great problem to have. We don't have a cap on that. We really see this as an opportunity for many of the multifamily properties across the region. And this is really driven by their interest in providing it as an amenity for their tenants. So I was just gonna, the chat that I was reading, I saw Ben Charlo made a mention that people with cars pay for parking away from home too. And that's a great point. I mean, you could pay north of $14 for a single few hours of parking at an event, and this is a great way to save on that. And that covers transit for the entire month.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So we've come into the end of our time here today. I'm going to take this opportunity actually to transition us and share my screen quickly to highlight an event that will be coming up next month that all three of the organizations that are being represented today are partnering on. I'm really excited to announce this is something that's going to be coming out with a lot more information in the future, but you've been hearing about transportation management organizations today. This year, we're all partnering to bring car-free MSP to the region. This is going to be an event that runs through September in culmination on September 22nd on World Car Free Day. There's going to be some really great opportunities to take a pledge to take car-free modes, maybe save some money on at an event or instead of parking yourself, as well as a challenge that you're going to see some folks making social media posts and have opportunities. And then throughout the month leading up to the 22nd, you will be able to participate in a number of events or information sessions from these different organizations to be able to try out new modes or engage with different folks to learn about how you can make these a real way of life and an opportunity in the future. So please, if you're interested, please follow us for more. And we're looking forward to being out there on the streets with you in the month of September throughout the region. With that all being said, we're coming to the end of our time here. When the webinar closes, we're going to have a questionnaire come out where you're going to have an opportunity to let us know if you want us to follow up with you, as well as give us a little feedback on what we shared here today. I'll make sure I follow up with all the questions that I might not have gotten to in chat. And with that being said, I want to make sure I'm thanking both of our presenters and experts really today from Metro Transit and Move Minneapolis. They shared a lot of great information with us, and looking forward to hosting them again in the future if we have the opportunity. Thank you all for joining us. Molly or Michael, if you have any closing comments with our last couple minutes here, please feel free to share. I know we're getting a lot of good engagement with the chat, so I hope we can continue this conversation with everyone here.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you for organizing.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Move Minnesota. We'll see you out there on the streets and doing stuff in the world.
Awesome. Looking forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you everyone for joining us today.